It all began some 180 years ago, along a shoreline like this. 12,000 miles of inlets and channels, rainforests and granite buttresses. At first it was called New Caledonia, then British Columbia, Canada's Pacific province. The first settlers found they must cope with nature in a new dimension. Forests 200 feet high, mountains reaching to 10,000, channeled tides that could destroy the inexperienced or unwary. Nature in these giant proportions forced men to think on the same grand scale. They were tough, courageous, and enduring under the most difficult of conditions. At first, they dropped the trees down the steep sides of inlets to the sea. Later, they built skid roads and dragged the logs to water behind a parade of oxen. Logs hurtled miles on water-fed flumes to the ocean. The common factor was water. Sailing ships arrived, looking for cargoes of logs and sawn lumber, and coastal mariners established a towboat industry to tow the logs and berth the ships. In Vancouver's Maritime Museum are photographs of those early days. Paddle-wheel vessels like the Beaver were capable of towing a sizable flat raft. Billets of wood fed the boilers in those days. Conversion to coal in the early 1900s gave the towboat longer range and efficiency. Coal burners like this towed ocean-going rafts like this, containing up to 2 million feet of logs. The days of sail were over. The towing industry converted once proud hulls into barges and put them in tow behind tugs. And the use of oil as a fuel increased the tug's range and efficiency even more. By 1925, the towing industry was a major one on the coast. And in that year, Island Tug and Barge went into business with one tug, the Quinitza, renamed the Island Planet, and still a member of a fleet that now numbers more than 120 tugs and barges. Although the company has bases of operations both in Vancouver and Victoria, the main repair and maintenance facilities are located in Victoria, the capital city of the province. From these and the Vancouver offices go forth instructions that control movements of the fleet, its captains and crew members. In the company shops, experts in a dozen different trades keep the fleet operational. Tugs and barges undergo periodic inspection on the marine ways. Tugs are re-engined and improved equipment is installed. Maintenance, repair, and refitting keep tugs and equipment in first-class condition. Important both to the company and coastal industry is underwater salvage and repair. The company divers spend most of their working days beneath the waves. At first, this popular marine restaurant served company employees only. Converted from the hull of the Princess Mary and later enlarged with the addition of the bridge from a Venezuelan tanker, it now caters to patrons from all over the world. In contrast to the relaxed atmosphere of the Princess Mary, the company dispatcher remains on the alert, ready to transmit and receive messages around the clock. This is the nerve center of the towboat industry. Commands transmitted here are converted into action at sea. Assisting ships to berth and depart is one of the traditional tasks of the tugboat. And on this coast, the movement of logs to the sawmill is just one of the many services performed for the vast forest industry. Douglas fir, western red cedar, Pacific coast hemlock, Sitka spruce, traveling the water route to the mill, just as they did 100 years ago. Flat rafts and bundle booms containing up to 2 million board feet of logs, enough to build 200 three-bedroom homes. The safe delivery of logs to the mill does not end the tugboat's assignment. While the logs begin their journey up the sawmill jackladder and through the saws that will convert them into boards and timber for the markets of the world, the tug prepares to take a new cargo on the line. Wood chips. Once the waste of the sawmill, now the raw material of the pulp, cellulose, and newsprint industries. Chip scows, towed singly or in tandem, loaded with mountains of chips. They are an extension of the sawmill's conveyors, keeping a river of chips flowing between the mill and pulp plants, like the big Crown Zellerbach installation at Elk Falls. To thousands of men and women in British Columbia, this covered barge has a special significance. It joins isolated communities to the outside. Once a week, this wharf in Vancouver is a hive of activity as general freight is assembled for the next voyage, and the regular cargo of wood pulp is unloaded. The bales of wood pulp have come from Port Alice on the west coast of Vancouver Island. They will be replaced by every conceivable kind of freight, from heavy machinery to frozen foodstuffs for the up-coast housewife, most of it on pallets for easy handling. Cement conduit for townsite drainage, tanks of propane gas for cooking, insulation for a fisherman's house, machinery and fittings for an island pulp mill. In 16 hours or less, the offloading cargo of pulp has been replaced by the palletized cargo of general freight. And the Island Express is ready to start on its weekly round. It will be 6 days before the Express enters this harbor again. The course will take it a total of more than 700 miles through island-dotted channels and tide rips to places like Beaver Cove, Port Hardy, Alert Bay, Holberg, and other ports of call. Captain, mate, and crew members, all seasoned coastal mariners, perform their tasks with long accustomed ease. The first stop. The captain manipulates the tug's up-to-date remote control system to make docking easier. Equipment and food supplies for a sawmill will be landed here, and a shipment of lumber will be picked up. With the exchange completed, the Express is ready to go on the line again. Around the stormy northern tip of Vancouver Island and through the narrow gap of Quatsino Narrows, heading towards the whaling station at Cole Harbor. Arrival coincides with the landing of several whales. On shore, the Frenchers strip the whale with their razor-sharp blades. Supplies will be offloaded here, and cases of whale meat and whale meal taken on board. Many calls will be made in the course of a week to fishing villages, mining communities, Air Force outposts. But the final port of call is Port Alice. Families are on hand to see the express arrive, and while important things are unloaded for small girls, a week's production of wood pulp is being loaded into the barge's elevator-equipped holds. This is a lifeline in action, delivering commodities that make life and enterprise possible, picking up pulp and other raw and processed materials for the return journey. For the last time on this voyage, the line is paid out, and the floating warehouse points its nose to the home port. Skirting the sea-battered promontory of Cape Scott, breasting the swells of the open Pacific, until the comparative shelter of the Straits of Georgia is attained. Then south through the maze of Gulf Islands, and home at last. Even as the barge passes the familiar skyline of the port, new freight will be assembling on the wharf. There'll be no rest for the Express in its 7-day round. And like the Express, the island exporter and its identical sister move perpetually along the ocean highway. Rated among the largest in the world, they perform a 425-mile shuttle service between a limestone quarry in British Columbia and a cement plant up the Willamette River near Portland, Oregon. At Blubber Bay on Texada Island, limestone is produced in readiness for the arrival of the ocean-going barge. Sudbury 2, the biggest tug in the North Pacific, eases the barge into loading position. And the loading begins. 11,000 tons of limestone will be heaped on deck in 20 hours, employing automatic equipment to distribute the crushed rock evenly. With a mountain of limestone on deck, the specially designed barge is ready to head for the open sea. This barge and its companion have carried bulk cargoes on the open sea from as far away as Mexico, 1,600 miles, to the port of Vancouver. For the crew, good food is the best medicine in any kind of weather. And a friendly game of cards helps to pass off-watch hours. The limestone mountain is towed at a steady 8 knots down the coast of Washington and Oregon, taking the full brunt of the open sea. Arrived abreast of the Columbia River, it turns to port and proceeds into American waters. Although the laden barge is 360 feet long, its shallow draft permits it to pass easily over the Columbia River bar. This is as far as the high seas tug Sudbury 2 will go. River tugs take over now, while Sudbury 2 takes the empty companion barge, seen in the distance, back to the limestone quarry for another load. The long run up the river begins, one tug pushing, and another tug arriving to pull, as passage is made through the city of Portland at dawn. This is a familiar route to the barge now. Every bridge, every navigational obstacle has been negotiated many times and without trouble. The importer and exporter were designed for this specific task, and with these conditions in mind. Not far from destination now, a few more turns in the river running an obstacle course of bars and shallows, and eventually the cement plant's offloading wharf is on the starboard beam. The barge's self-contained offloading equipment is fast and efficient. The cargo of limestone will be discharged in less than 18 hours. Limestone moves swiftly along the shore-based conveyors to the stockpile, where it will await conversion into Portland cement and agricultural lime. The successful performance of the two ocean-going limestone barges inspired the design and construction of the world's largest self-loading, self-dumping log barge. Before construction began, blueprints were converted into a scale model in order to test hull performance under all conditions. When the naval architects and the company were satisfied, the keel was laid for the 360-foot barge. Sheets of steel began to take shape. And in due course, the huge barge was completed, inspected, and ready for launching. Shortly afterwards, its cranes and grapnels rigged, the self-loading, self-dumping log barge went on the line behind the tug, heading on its maiden voyage and its first load of logs. Barges like this can go into forested inlets considered inaccessible before, eliminating the need for the logging operator to install expensive loading equipment. The big log barge is headed through Dean Channel to pick up a cargo at an isolated operation near Kimsquit. Shortly after the island yarder arrives and is anchored in position, the crane operators come in by float plane. The cargo is ready and waiting, a floating landscape of Douglas fir, hemlock, and cedar. The cranes lower the barge's two boom boats into the water, where they'll be used to herd the floating logs within reaching distance of the cranes. And now the stage is set for loading to begin. The 90-foot crane booms drop their grapnels to grasp logs 3 and 4 at a time, representing weights of up to 25 tons. It's a smoothly executed operation in which boom boats and cranes work as a team to pile logs on a deck longer than a football field. The jaws of the grapnels can encircle a log 8 feet in diameter, and the crane operators handle them with amazing precision. Not too many years ago, it took 6 weeks to assemble 2.5 million feet of logs into a raft capable of risking the open sea. And now, the same amount of logs can be loaded on the deck of this barge in less than 24 hours. With a full load of logs, the island yarder travels at 8 knots. The old-time ocean-going log rafts were fortunate to move at 1 or 2 knots. Arrived at destination near the big mainland mills, the barge is held on the tug's tow line as manually controlled valves are opened and compartments in its hull begin to flood, tipping it into unloading position. Gradually at first, the yarder begins to tilt. "10,000 tons of logs pointed toward the salt chuck. It could take weeks to break down a 2.5 million foot Davis raft. The island yarder has unloaded the same number of logs in a half hour. Within minutes, it's ready to go on the line again behind the tug, heading back to a logging area for another load. Not too far from the scene of the log dump, still another type of barge is taking on its accustomed load. The rail car barge links steel with steel, a floating railway track across bodies of water too wide to bridge. At terminals in Vancouver, Victoria, and Seattle, the boxcars load and unload. Names on the cars are a catalog of some of North America's great railroads, all of them depending on the rail car barge when the ocean puts an end to the track. The trackmobile, half truck and half locomotive, is used to move rail cars on and off the barges. The company's freight terminus and warehouse complex at Lime Bay in Victoria Harbor is a transfer point for any kind of commodity a boxcar or a flat car can carry. These boxcars will travel 100 miles, on track all the way, and never move an inch. The barge and scow have undergone dramatic changes in the past 2 decades, becoming highly specialized, each equipped to perform a specific task. The island pine carries chlorine under pressure in fixed deck tanks, and liquid caustic below decks, chemicals used in the pulp industry. Equally specialized are the company's tanker barges for the transport of various types of petroleum products, or the new covered barge seen here, engaged in the transportation of wood pulp. Specialization doesn't rule out versatility. Barges like the Island Exporter and Importer, designed to transport limestone, can carry loads of pilings with equal success. They proved themselves carrying cargoes of industrial salt through near hurricanes. Barges of this size and design can carry virtually any kind of bulk cargo anywhere. Likewise, the rail car barge can carry more than rail cars. This gigantic tank, for instance, destined for a pulp and paper plant at Sitka, Alaska. Specialization and versatility of the barge go hand in hand with the constantly improving performance of the tugboat. Tugs are equipped with more efficient power plants and new navigational aids as fast as they become available. The Island Sovereign, with its power doubled to 2,400 horsepower, undergoes sea trials before being assigned to the 360-foot Island Yarder. The barge, one of the oldest forms of transportation, big enough now to shoulder its way through the heaviest sea, more than holds its own in this age of changing transportation methods. No longer limited to the safety of sheltered waters, today's tug, followed by an obedient barge or a chain of barges, can go anywhere on the ocean highway, a highway that leads to everywhere.
Here is a quiet garden overlooking the inner harbor of Victoria, the capital of British Columbia. It might be called a mariner's garden, for between the foliage lie the sentimental mementos of adventures at sea, worn-out propellers, anchors, faded figureheads, dreaming of days gone by, when they knew the beat of wind and wave and weathered the storm and stress of the seven seas. In this peaceful spot, the past, present, and future meet to create a perfect setting for the modern offices of Island Tug and Barge Limited, whose business today encompasses the oceans of the world. The beginnings were small. 35 years ago, with one tug, they worked only the coastal waters. Today, this is one of the largest deep-sea towing and salvage companies in North America. And behind this record of progress lies a story of men and ships and sea, which might well be called the saga of the Sudburys. The SS Sudbury was acquired in April 1954. She began her history in 1940 as a World War II corvette, and after a brilliant record in the North Atlantic, was converted to a tug by Crown Zellerbach of Canada Limited. Her first assignment for her new owners was to the Caribbean. She brought back 4 shallow draft tankers through the Panama Canal, and then, in tandem with the Island Sovereign, 4,000 miles up the coast to Victoria, B.C. This was the longest single-line towing operation in marine history, almost a mile long from the tugs to the last tanker. At Victoria, the tankers were converted to self-dumping log barges. A distress call was received on November 1st, 1955, sparking the drama of men against the sea, and the saga of the Sudburys began in earnest. Racing 3,500 miles across the stormy North Pacific, the Sudbury, in 11 days sailing time, placed her tow line aboard the disabled freighter Macedonia and brought her safely to dry dock in Vancouver. The exploit made worldwide headlines. It was one more victory in the long tradition of the seas and the men who sailed them. In the fall of 1956, the Sudbury added another chapter to the story of the company's deep water operation. She was assigned to tow a steel barge across the Pacific to break up in Japan. Originally built in 1870 as the Cunard liner Parthia, the old vessel, now loaded with scrap iron, was renamed the Straits Maru for her final voyage. On September 6, 1956, the Sudbury and her tow headed out of Victoria on the Great Circle route, up the BC coast and across the long curve of the Aleutians toward Asia. Smooth sailing in calm seas through well-charted sea lanes. The old vessel riding with dignity as became her age at the end of her long tow line. But as the Sudbury bore northwest toward the Aleutians, she struck a gale. Buffeted by the heavy seas, the hulk sprang a leak and rode lower and lower in the water. The skipper decided to run for the shelter of the Aleutians. They took refuge in a bleak, uncharted bay. As soon as the vessels made safe anchorage, the old ship was pumped out. Emergency repairs were made, and when she was once more in seaworthy shape, she was towed out from her anchorage for the last leg of her final voyage to the breakup yards. Some days later, nearing the islands of Japan, they encountered another heavy blow, but the repairs had been well made, and the old vessel rode out the storm. In delivering the Straits Maru safely at Osaka, the Sudbury had completed the company's first trans-Pacific tow. The voyage took 40 days. Recovering her portable emergency pumps, she headed light and fast for home, having written finish to the second chapter in the saga of the Sudburys. But a call for assistance sent her back north toward the Aleutians. The tug's salvage chief was making slow progress in heavy seas, towing the stern section merchantman. But it was a losing battle. The Sudbury was able to remove the three-man crew from the tow before it sank during the night. At this same time, a call came for the Sudbury to rescue the Thunderbird, adrift in mid-Pacific. Taking the Liberty ship in tow on November 22nd, the Sudbury delivered her safely to Seattle early in December. A short time later, she was called out to rescue the North, and the battle of men against the sea went on. By now, the Sudbury had firmly established an international reputation as the most capable deep-sea salvage ship in the North Pacific. February 21st, 1958, the freighter Loma Land ran short of fuel in heavy weather 400 miles off the BC coast. Despite the weather, the Sudbury finally got a line aboard on the 23rd and commenced her tow to the mainland. Meanwhile, another emergency, far out in the Pacific. The freighter Andrus Legend had lost her propeller and was drifting helplessly. This was a job for the long-range Sudbury. The Island Sovereign was immediately dispatched to take over the Loma Land. Another salvage vessel attempting to reach the Andrus Legend had already been forced back by raging seas. The hazardous task of transferring the tow to the Island Sovereign was successfully completed, and the Sudbury raced west for mid-Pacific. Contact with the Andrus Legend was made in dense fog on March 6th, 1,400 miles north-northwest of Hawaii and 2,000 miles west of Victoria. Adrift for 11 days, the Legend was low on provisions, and the food from the Sudbury was a welcome sight. A series of increasingly heavy lines were passed across, so the freighter could winch in and make fast her end of the Sudbury's 2-inch steel towing hawser. The weather moderated, and the Sudbury was able to launch a boatload of badly needed fresh provisions for the Greek freighter. Two of the world's most powerful tugs were added to the fleet in the fall of 1958, the Cambrian Salver and Sudbury II. By basing the Cambrian Salver in Yokohama and the Sudbury II in Victoria, the company was in a position to provide rescue, salvage, or long-distance towing jobs anywhere in the Pacific. Vessels were recommissioned in Sydney, where they had been in the service of the Australian Department of Lighthouses and Navigation since the end of World War II. Sudbury II sailed for Victoria on September 22nd, manned by the same experienced officers and crew who had made the original Sudbury the foremost salvage vessel in the North Pacific. During the voyage, all hands were kept busy making her shipshape for the new owners. Late in October, she entered Canadian waters, passed through the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and entered the harbor of Victoria to join her famous namesake. She tied up at the company's dock for a complete refitting job. Island Tug has machine shop facilities right at the dockside, geared to handle most of its own overhaul and maintenance work. Here, a fleet of 30 tugs and more than 100 scows and barges of all types are kept in top operating condition. A fully equipped electronics shop maintains the radio communications equipment so vital to the far-ranging towboat fleet. Here, electronic navigation aids, direction finders, radar, and echo sounders are serviced, and spare units kept ready for instant replacement. The most modern underwater salvage gear was readied for Sudbury II. Both the Cambrian Salver and Sudbury II are equipped with recompression chambers. They carry a full complement of hard hat and scuba diving gear. Seafire cutting torches and Cox's underwater guns are on board at all times. Experienced divers are on standby in Victoria, ready to fly to the scene of salvage operations anywhere in the Pacific. The Sudbury II is a floating powerhouse, developing 3,800 horsepower on her twin screws. Four 950-horsepower Cooper Bessemer diesels supply power to 4 motors, geared 2 to each propeller shaft. All available space below deck is crammed with heavy salvage gear. Pumps, air compressors, welders, and lighting plants are kept ready for use anywhere at any time. Miles of steel cable, towing pennants, and ground tackle are stowed aft. Salvage anchors, steel plate, hoses, air lines, anything that might be needed on the high seas far from any port are carried in the forward holds. Each vessel has its own fully equipped machine shop on board, manned by members of the crew. The latest electronic navigation aids were installed in Sudbury II, including improved radar. A single sideband radio set capable of voice transmission anywhere in the Pacific was added to the normal communications channels. Sudbury II was ready for action at sea by May of 1959. But in the meantime, her sister ship, the Yokohama-based Cambrian Salver, was on her way to South America. On May 29th, she set out from Concepcion, Chile, towing the 33,000-ton battleship, the Almirante La Torre, on the first leg of a 10,000-mile voyage. This tow, the longest and biggest ever attempted by a single vessel in the Pacific, ended successfully 91 days later at the breakup yards at Yokosuka, Japan. During the following 7 months, the 2 Sudburys teamed up to log a spreading pattern of achievement as they shuttled back and forth across the Pacific. Early on the morning of July 14th, the Sudbury II warped slowly out from her moorings in Victoria's inner harbor on her first assignment for her new masters. A tug in name only, she dwarfs the smaller units in the family fleet and is one of the most powerful privately owned towing vessels that sail the seas. Ship's complement and crew have won their sea spurs towboating along British Columbia's rugged coast as well as in deep water, and they are ready to meet any challenge the sea has to offer. At this time, she was heading for her first tow. Company workboats and crews had already rigged towing pennants to the 2 obsolete Liberty ships, the Carroll Lombard and the Henderson Llewellyn, anchored off Victoria. The long towing cable was made fast. The big vessel took up the slack in the tow line. Ships began their journey to the scrapyard, and the Sudbury II was off on her first island tug and barge assignment. With her tandem tow, the powerful vessel made steady progress on a 4,600-mile Great Circle route across the North Pacific. Then, 8 days out of Japan, she had a brush with Typhoon Ellen. The main fury of Typhoon Ellen, only to encounter heavy seas with no wind, an aftermath of another typhoon. The seas became calmer, and the tempo of the voyage picked up. The men of the Sudbury, having faced and overcome the threat of near disaster, felt renewed confidence in her seaworthiness. In the smoother waters close to Japan, the Sudbury II made good time and delivered her first trans-Pacific tow to the breakup yards at Hirao, Japan, 38 days out of Victoria. On the other side of the Pacific, her sister ship, Sudbury, had left Victoria for San Francisco. There she picked up two 10,000-ton liberties before starting west on a 2,000-mile trek to meet Sudbury II, running light out of Japan at a point just off the Hawaiian Islands. Old friends exchanged news from both sides of the Pacific. The difficult job of transferring the tow from one ship to another was carried out without incident. Then the Sudbury II, with the two freighters in tow, shaped her course 3,400 miles northwest to Japan. Her sister ship turned back, running light for San Francisco and further orders. Typhoon Charlotte struck with full fury as Sudbury II neared her destination, an encounter best described in the skipper's own words. We had only one chance to get on the other of the typhoon's estimated path, and we didn't make it. The center passed very close to us. With so much rain and spray, it was hard to see the tow and keep ahead of it as we ran before the storm. But we came through with no damage to tug or tow. After a short stop at sea, they moved on. On October 24th, Sudbury II delivered her second tandem tow to the Japanese shipbreakers. She then resumed the Trans-Pacific shuttle service. Running light, she set course once more for Hawaii and another meeting with the Sudbury, out of San Francisco with a baby flat top in tow, the Cape Esperance. Once again, the two Sudburys met in mid-Pacific. Transferring the tow line at sea was carried out for a second time, while a U.S. Coast Guard helicopter looked on. Sudbury II lined out for Japan for the third time since leaving Victoria. While the the smaller Sudbury returned home light, the bigger tug completed an uneventful trip to Japan with the Cape Esperance. And then on December 14th, she too set her bow for Victoria. But 3 days out of Japan, she was diverted south to search for an obsolete carrier, the Guadalcanal, gone adrift while being towed by another company. After racing 1,500 miles through heavy seas, contact was made with the carrier south of Midway Island. The crew of 8 men aboard the derelict had faced a bleak Christmas until the tug came to their rescue on December 23rd. This had been their 9th day adrift. Making her tow line fast to the carrier's trailing pennant, Sudbury 2 headed back for Japan, bringing the Guadalcanal safely to harbor on January 7th after a 2,400-mile tow. 3 days later, she cleared Hirao for home, running eastward across the wintry North Pacific. At Astoria, Oregon, she took another obsolete carrier in tow and arrived at Victoria on February 5th after 7.5 grueling months at sea and with 31,000 miles under her keel. New chapters in the saga of the Sudburys and in the story of Island Tug and Barge Limited are being written every day. And in the days to come, the Sudbury, Sudbury 2, and the Cambrian Salver will continue to ply their way back and forth across the Pacific, always on call in time of emergency. A mighty trio to be reckoned with in the endless struggle of men against the sea.
British Columbia has a rugged and lonely coast of fjords and inlets, bays and channels. Hidden rocks and treacherous shoals have claimed many mariners who have dared to run this coast without the respect it demands. Including the islands, there is a shoreline of 16,000 miles, home of killer whales and otters and sea lions. In this part of the world, storms can whip into a fury in minutes, lashing the shore and driving ships to a rocky collision. On one cold spring night, C-SPAN officials received an emergency call. The SS Van Leen, with a cargo of new automobiles, was grounded on the west coast of Vancouver Island at Barkley Sound, the graveyard of the Pacific. She was in danger of breaking up. Could C-SPAN help? Proud flagship of the Sudbury was dispatched, and within hours was at the wreck. The Sudbury 2 is a deep-sea tug with firefighting and pollution control equipment, a fully operational machine shop that can make elaborate repairs at sea, gear for both scuba and deep-sea diving. She can steam at full speed for 45 days and nights. C-SPAN salvage master made a preliminary survey and evaluated the situation. It is only the best navigators, the best seamen, and the best vessels that can work in this environment. Such men and ships make up C-SPAN International Limited. This company of 41 tugs and 225 barges plies the coast at will, moving material and correcting some of man's mistakes. Divers found the Van Leen was holed directly below the engine room, with serious damage to the right aft section of the hull. She was down at the stern, her decks awash with heavy seas. The salvage master was faced with three problems: to contain leaking fuel oil, to salvage the cargo, to save the ship. Gale force winds were forecast. Should she be pumped clean of fuel oil and pulled off the rocks? Or should she be pulled free intact, temporarily repaired, and towed to a shipyard? While these questions were being considered, the tug Sea-Span Navigator and the oil barge Sea-Span 850 were standing by. Several hundred tons of bunker sea oil still in the ship's tanks were leaking into her holds and spilling into the sea. There could be little doubt that the first priority was to stop the leak and contain the spill, then remove the cargo. Inspection showed that the ship could not be saved. Absorbent pillows were floated into the oil slick to soak up some of the spill. A slick liquor, airlifted to the scene, took more of the sticky mess. Special pump scows made the connection to empty the fuel tanks into the oil barge. A canvas boom was looped around the spill to prevent it from spreading. With the oil under control, the Sea-Span men turned their attention to the cargo. Booms were cut away to give clear access to the holds. Hatches were lifted, and the cars were ready to be taken off the ship. With heavy weather brewing, time was critical. Barges were standing by to receive the cars, and the cargo had to be moved quickly. A helicopter with a special quick-release sling was brought over the ship, and the airlift began. It was a matter of seconds to rig the sling to grab a car. Careful, precise maneuvering brought the cars out of the hold without smashing into obstacles on all sides. Once clear, the trip was made quickly to the waiting barges. Discharge, pickup. Discharge, pickup. The operation took on a rhythm, and the valuable cargo moved in a steady flow. Sea-Span officials are not saying that they are the only people who could have done it, but the Sudbury II is the largest tug on the Pacific coast, and the barges and pollution control equipment were on hand, and they did carry out the whole salvage operation in a matter of hours. Dramatic sea rescues are part of the romantic history of maritime trade. They excite the public imagination. They try the best in men and ships. When jobs like this are completed, the crews of the barges and the Sudbury walk just a little taller. Another side of Seaspan's operation is even more important to the company that has to move cargo by the most efficient means available. Sudbury, too, takes off her shining armor and puts on work boots and gloves for the job of towing bulk cargo in a shuttle service between British Columbia and Oregon. Six ocean-going barges can handle from 5,000 to more than 12,000 tons each, making the run as far south as Mexico and north to Alaska. Once in the haven of the Columbia River, the ocean tug turns its barge over to a smaller river tug with shallow draft for delivery. An empty barge is waiting for the return trip to BC for another load of limestone for Oregon. Up anchor and away. The forest industry is #1 in British Columbia and occupies a major place in Seaspan's coastal service. Two self-loading, self-dumping log barges provide a quick, economical solution to the problem of moving large loads of logs in rough, open water. Seaspan Forester, largest barge of this type, can handle nearly 5 million board feet of logs in a 20,000-ton load. Enough to build a small town. 3 18-foot boom boats of 165 horsepower carried on deck are lowered into the water to act as sheepdogs. They herd the logs close to the barge, where 2 40-ton cranes can pick them up and stack them on deck. This is the transport used for large loads in rough water. A full load can be made up in 24 hours and delivered quickly. These self-loading, self-dumping log barges cruise along the BC coast at a comfortable speed of 7 knots with a full load. They move 300 million board feet of logs a year. At the booming grounds, the dramatic unloading begins. Tanks in the hull of the 453-foot barge are flooded with water, controlled from the tug safely out of the way. As the tanks fill, the barge is deliberately capsized to the point where the logs roll off the deck. A clean dump in less than 30 minutes. And the barge bobs up like a cork, ready to be towed away for another load. At C-SPAN's Twin Creek booming grounds, the logs are sorted according to the type of wood and the grade, ready to be delivered to the mills, getting the custom treatment. In more sheltered water, smaller tugs in the fleet tow logs by flat raft and bundled booms. Tugboat business, sawmills produced a great quantity of wood chips, sawdust, and hog fuel. This was one of the first bulk cargoes handled by tug and barge. With the demands of today's construction, the volume of sawmill waste has multiplied to the point where it is the major bulk cargo carried. 142 C-SPAN barges devote their entire time to this job. One tug can tow as many as 3 barges, each with a load of more than 2,000 tons. Pulp and paper plants in British Columbia and Washington convert this waste into pulp or burn it as fuel. Other barges provide an efficient service for moving packaged lumber. Forklift trucks load and unload large bundles of lumber to feed the hungry building industry along the West Coast. C-SPAN's Victoria Division office, its adjacent Point Ellis shipyards, Lime Bay Freight Terminal, and railcar barge facilities are all on Vancouver Island. The tanker barge has proved to be a most economical way to deliver oil along the rugged BC coast, which must be supplied by sea. 9 of these vessels, ranging in capacity up to 25,000 barrels, serve industry and semi-isolated communities. 240 feet long, an oil tanker barge has 18 tanks with 4 pumping systems which can be used in tandem. Some petroleum products are handled in drums and packages. Dry cargo also is sent along the coast in covered barges, ranging up to 3,900-ton capacity. Specialized pulp barges 610 and 611 carry nearly 2,000 tons each and feature 3 hydraulically operated doors with ramps to speed up loading and unloading. Weekly express freight service to coastal communities on northern Vancouver Island covers a 700-mile route. Seaspan 630 is a floating warehouse which carries 3 forklifts for handling containerized and pallet cargo. When the tide is wrong for roll-on, roll-off operation using the barge ramps, a fixed crane takes over. An elevator provides access to refrigerated chambers on the lower deck. Seaspan tugs are often commissioned to tow barges from other companies. It's all part of the business. Mines, logging camps, construction sites, villages, towns, and cities are all serviced by Seaspan barges. 35 flat-deck units holding up to 4,000 tons ply the BC coast constantly. Some have ramps for beach landings. Railway cars are moved on barges along the British Columbia coast and down into Washington. Terminals in Victoria, North Vancouver, and Seattle handle the traffic for these 16 towed vessels, which range in capacity up to 31 cars. The motor vessel Doris York is a sophisticated, self-propelled rail car ferry. With her twin decks served by elevator, she can carry 25 rail cars or 60 highway trailers. She and the Greg York keep a year-round service operating between the BC mainland and Vancouver Island. In central Canada, 2 pusher tugs provide a regular rail car service from Detroit along the St. Clair River. Ships, lighter aboard ship, have opened a new field for Seaspan tugs. Cargo is carried in 500 deadweight ton lighters, or barges, which in turn are carried on a freighter. Tugs are called in to provide the tow for these barges to the shore. Later, loaded barges are towed out to the mothership for the return voyage. One of the more dramatic assignments is the installation of bridge sections. On BC's famous Fraser River, Seaspan worked with bridge engineers to erect the Mission Bridge. mounted on a barge to lift the heavy steel. Section by section, the spans went up until the last section was carefully lifted into the sky and gently moved into the precise gap. Skyhooks couldn't have done it better. Vancouver Shipyards is a busy subsidiary of Seaspan, a hive of design, construction, and repair. At this 15-acre site, other professionals are at work building automobile ferries and fishing boats, tugs, and barges. Here, beside the head office in North Vancouver, repairs, maintenance, and modifications are provided for deep-sea vessels. A Synchrolift marine elevator lifts ships from the water, and the rail system carries them to the various working centers. Seaspan's Victoria office. The North Vancouver office, international headquarters for Seaspan. And large deep water ships also have their handmaidens busily escorting them to berth. The tug and barge business has come a long way in British Columbia. In the summer of 1973, an historic voyage began at the shipyard elevator. By sinking barges, floating others on top, and then pumping them out, a three-tier barge was formed. A flotilla of 7 tugs towed 25 barges stacked 3 deep on a 3,200-mile voyage to Tuktoyaktuk in the Northwest Territories. The trip was the start of a specialized tug and barge service from world ports to the Canadian Arctic. Such is the nature of Seaspan's pioneering spirit.
I grew up on a farm in Hadley, Massachusetts, and here in the attics we found these old bicycles. This is a bone shaker before they discovered the chain and the sprocket and so forth. And it kind of trained on this sort of thing here. We found a lot of super high-wheelers, too, with enormous wheels. This is made for a racing bicycle for a tall man. I can't reach the pedals all the way down. But I'm getting trained for Cape Horn, and this is one way to do it. When you put on the brakes, it's a disaster. But with a strong neck, I'm still alive and ready to climb up something that I could find on the farm nearest to the Cape Horn mast. This pole is rotten at the bottom, but it won't fall down on account of the wires. And I'm swaying now, making believe I'm off the horn and getting ready for that sort of thing. But this is a kid with a one-track mind, if I ever saw one, just standing on his head to make sure he'd never be scared, as he's been reading about in the books by Jack London and so forth. I thought the books by London were factual, but they're fiction. And they had a fight on every other page, so I trained and trained. I became a wrestler, jiu-jitsu expert, acrobatic expert, and therefore never had a fight on all the voyaging I've had years later. I got ready for it on the farm before I'd even seen salt water. But now we're off for adventures, great sailing adventures aboard the Peking and this enormous four-masted bark carrying 5,300 tons of cargo. She has 32 sails over an acre of canvas, and she's an immense, the largest sailing ship in the world at the time by about 5 tons. Those 3 lower sails each weigh a ton or more when they're dry. When they're wet or full of ice, no one knows what they weigh. But she's carrying 5,300 tons of cargo, plus about 3,000 tons of ship. That's 8,000 tons, sailed entirely by human hands. There's no motors, there's no winches, there's no switches, there's no lights, nothing but human hands to power this entire vessel, to drive it 11,000 miles where it doesn't want to go, the wrong way around Cape Horn. I've gone aboard now in Hamburg in the winter times, cold dust and soft cold smoke and smog all over the place. And the North Sea in the wintertime is a horrible place. We stayed there week after week until this greatest storm of the century came up on Friday the 13th of December, 1929. This storm wrecked 68 ships along the coasts of Belgium, Holland, and Germany. And we were out there in this storm, but of course this vessel was built for Cape Horn, so this storm, as long as she didn't run aground in the comparatively small North Sea, was safe enough, but what we almost did pile up on the coast of Holland. Here, a picture from the bowsprit of the figurehead and the 3-ton anchor hanging over the side was caught by the waves and dashed back on deck, breaking the chains that held it, and then we went up there to secure this anchor on deck. We got bashed up, too. Carried some of the fellows aft to be patched up by the captain, who was an expert at repairing seamen, no matter how they seem to be smashed around. And imagine the tonnage of the water smashing, bashing to catch a 3-ton solid steel anchor and throw it back on deck. There's a young fellow up here making fast the inner jib, and he's got a job to do, and you go ahead and do it no matter what. There's something about these vessels that cause some kind of hypnotism. You do things you'd never dream of doing in your ordinary mind. But look now, this is just the North Sea. This is not Cape Horn. The rails are going under maybe 3-4 feet or so, but off the Horn they go 20, 25, 30 feet underwater. And remember how cameras cut down the size of waves? If you've ever taken pictures of waves, you'll find them looking terribly small when you come out with the pictures. But those waves are still just North Sea. They're not Cape Horn. Off the Horn, I got 80 feet high, and they'd come up between me and the horizon. But here's a sailor who's been bashed around the deck for a while, and he's kind of catching his breath now, wondering what he's going to do next. He's hanging on to the lifelines, but he's a good sailor. Standing on one of the spare spars there, he's emptying the water out of his boot into his oilskins and making himself a little lighter. Not drier. There's no way to dry anything except by sleeping in your clothes on board. Now, these pictures taken from the lowest yard on the mainmast here, the 6 yards on each mast, and when you get up to the top, it is some height. But again, the North Sea seas are nothing to what we'll get off the Horn when you get down that way. But 17 days were spent in the North Sea until finally we got a fair wind and headed down in December, down south through the English Channel, putting on chafing gear to prevent the sails from chafing, especially during the doldrums when you're just rolling around with no wind. But chafing is a deadly enemy on board ships, and we're always watching the sails, checking everything to see they don't chafe unduly. But here the skipper is heaving the lead. He dropped the lead from the end of the bowsprit, 56 pounds of lead, and it's armed with grease to make sure to bring up a sample of the bottom. And here they're learning the lines, 350 different lines we had to learn the German names of, and they don't even know them in English. And boy, you better learn them, because if you don't, they either smash something or kill somebody, and they take a dim view of either one. But the captain's right there just ticking them off and just saying how dire it is if you make the wrong step. But here we're plowing south, gradually repairing things. We did have damage during that enormous storm which sunk so many ships in the North Sea, which is a graveyard, the greatest graveyard of the world in ships in years gone by. Now we're cutting off the old stay and going to seize on a new one. We carry miles of wire and all kinds of repair equipment aboard the ship. We're not supposed to go into any harbor for any reason whatsoever except in harbor of destination for the cargo. These vessels are self-sufficient for months on end with food, water, supplies, repair equipment, and down on the bowsprit they're smearing the wire, bare steel, with white lead and tallow before parceling and serving, therefore preserving the steel for years to come. Here they're bringing the 3-ton anchor back on deck, where it is securely bolted for the voyage around the Horn, and they don't get it out unless they happen to get too close to land. There's a skipper heaving up on a corner of the 3-ton anchor, and he can move it too. He's 240 pounds of muscle, and what a man. On his 56th voyage around Cape Horn, more than any man I ever heard of. But he is a super seaman, and I said there's nothing I could do better than follow his lead and how he survived that many times around the Horn. Here they're having lifeboat drill, which they had once during the voyage, and it seemed to be sufficient, because generally you can't get lifeboats over anyway unless it's fairly smooth. In rough seas, forget it. And they're very handy in moderate conditions, but not in very heavy seas. Skipper lending a hand here now. Nobody takes a chance with his discipline, no matter what. The rope's end in the mate's hand now. Somebody made a mistake in one of the lines, so they're all getting the training. And what he does is name some line there, and they rush out to grab a hold of the line he's named, and then he names another one, and they rush out to get a hold of that. Of course, after a while, he's kind of tired, so then he names something way up the rigging, and by the time they get down again, he can rush after them. He's rested, and he can rush after them again. Then the first shall be last, a fellow capsized in the slippery deck. Now, he has this special dog now, owned by the skipper, who knows just where to bite these fellows to make them go faster. He's supposed to bite the last fellow in line, but sometimes he makes a mistake, and he got the first fellow in the line that time. Here he comes there, and you must run up and down the rigging. There's no walking. Handling sail is always on the double. On a Sunday, I train the fellows in wrestling and so forth, which they wanted to know very badly, because it was so obviously easy to handle somebody if you know wrestling. Pictures taken now from the end of the foreyard. It seems I'm almost off on another vessel. Looking back there, they're repairing sails on deck. We make all our own sails as we go along. Everything is done aboard ship it possibly can be, and so they can repair the ship. And generally, she looks better coming into port than she did when she left, especially on deck. Over the side, of course, the rust streaks are impossible to get at while you're on the way. Now the forecastle head is nice and dry, and the bowling wave here bowls ahead of her here, just a marvelous place to be and watch that wave. And then way out ahead of us, the end of the bowsprit is, generally speaking, 50 feet above the sea, but sometimes it dives under the sea off the Horn, and that we expect to see later on. Captain arrives with his dog, specially trained by the skipper like no other dog I've ever seen in my life. Every other day, he simply grabs the dog's muzzle and just squeezes till the dog shrieks with pain, and then he says, "Now look, that's for nothing. Now see you don't do something." That's the general way. The dog has never been petted, knows nothing about it, will take a piece out of you if you try to pet him, as he has no knowledge of it whatsoever. Never did. Here the fellows are splicing up new ratlins, which are getting old on one of the masts, but all of a sudden the wind changes, so they dash off to change the attitude of 32 sails to the new wind direction. Also, 18 yards must be altered to the same conditions, and this day or night, no matter what, you get used to. But it's quite a maze of rigging, 350 lines. Here's the cook. There the cook generally shows up about this time with no hair. But there you have sailors as close to heaven as sailors ever get, way, way up aloft. And you look down on the horizon in all directions. You are the highest thing in creation. It's a marvelous place because you're quite a distance from the mate on deck anyway. And that all does help. But what a spot. All those sails, and you put them up there and made them from scratch. Skipper with his Sunday coat on, taking a sight, and that gold braid would turn green if there's any spray. Here he's cutting hair. He's an expert. And also these fellows very seldom pull on something. They jerk. They can make a lot more strain on something if you jerk. Like pounding a nail through a plank. If you tried to push on the nail with a hammer, it'd never go, would it? But if you hit it like a big jerk, you can create 5-10 times more power momentarily, a split second. And that's the way they sail these enormous ships. Now here on the Sunday, there's the port watch lining up, but they're all going back, except the man at the wheel and man on lookout, going back to catch up on sleep. They're on 4 hours, off 4 hours, on 4, off 4, and they eat in their time below, and they mend their clothes in their time below. They're the skipper's an expert on everything aboard ship. Look at the size of his hands cutting this fellow's hair. The trouble is to get some scissors to get on his fingers, or you have to use special ones. There are a lot of fishermen and fishermen's advisors out on the bowsprit, and trying to spear. Oh, look, the shark wouldn't touch that salt pickle pork. It's simply no lean on it at all. It greased our potatoes, though. I'm in the center now, sewing sails. The sailmaker's at my right with the officer's cap on, and this is double-aught hemp canvas. And you could make a pile of it 7 feet high on deck. It'd stand right up there by itself. It's so stiff. I could do 20 feet of steam at racing speed in an hour and do about 2 feet the next hour getting over it. But the dog doesn't want any petting. Just kick a stick and kick him in the face, and that's all right. That suits him fine. Now we're changing all the sails to the older suit of sails, the weaker suit for wear and tear through the doldrums and through the trade-ins and all. But when we get down to the horn, our back will go with the stronger sails, the strongest possible we can do. Now, when you pull with your hands, up go your feet. Now, this seems a very silly sort of a way to be up on there. Why doesn't somebody tie these foot ropes down where they belong? But no, that would be too easy. It seems to work. We all trust the foot ropes, even though they go high on your head. Oh, look, one day the turkey got sick, so he ate him quick before he died. Well, you know what I mean. We dispatched the turkey before he died of some sickness. And anyway, it tasted good. It didn't poison us at all. But here we have 4 propellers chewing along, chewing up the wake, going like a bat. 4 propellers? No, it's simply the wind in the sails that we made with our own hands, and we put up there with our own hands, and we adjusted with our own hands. Roaring along she is now, 12, 14, 15, 16 knots. Tremendous, 8,000 tons, bowling along. This is what we love. We just created it. We feel like Superman. We made all this happen. And she is going 8,000 tons, going where we want to go, not necessarily where she wants to go. Coming about the first time, I thought somebody had made a terrible mistake. I thought the yards would crash down, but no, they didn't make any mistake. The skipper doesn't make mistakes. He's a super seaman if I ever saw one. And I believe the things I learned from him saved my life several times over in our many voyages around the world. Look, the dog bit the wrong fellow. You're not supposed to bite the paid sailors. We have 5 professional sailors aboard, but he's supposed to bite the trainees, you see. We had a lot of trainees aboard, and they needed a little biting now and then to make them go a little faster. And they get the idea, and here's a way of multiplying power, but through our hands only. Every hand is on the capstan bars and pushing fast. Handling sail is always on the double, so that they'll always know how to do it, and won't get caught in any other way. See notice the jerking now? He. And the he is when you all must jerk together or it doesn't work. Lovely dog. I wanted to pet the dog, but there wasn't a chance. He'd never been trained that way, and he thought you were doing something bad if you tried. Beautiful dog, but no sense at all from our point of view. Now we got the, excuse me, Charlie at the left there, a special pal of mine. He's tearing down the rigging, and of course, when you do that, you become kind of a mess. Now, he is positive that I wouldn't waste any film on this kind of a business, but he was a little mistaken, and he had trouble when he showed this picture to a Sunday school later on. Now, these sails are becoming bleached and just beautifully white, bleached and cleaned by the rain, and there's no pollution out here whatsoever. But you should see the safety regulations they have on the ship. You know, they never heard the word. Safety, what's that? Take care of yourself in every case, and you'll be all right. And that's what they teach. Now, looking down, look at these sails on one mast. Down, 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 down. We got sails down, down. And finally, you can barely see the ship way down there. Sails, they are what make it go, what we make, and our connection with the elements are through those sails. And I have a few extra pictures of them, but I'm not ashamed of it. The sails are everything. They're our connection. But the fellow on top is simply striking the other fellow down in a line. Neither one of them is fastened, you see. And so why should you be? Just pay attention and get a hold of something. And it'd be silly to let go, wouldn't it? And as I said, there's no safety regulations whatsoever. One time I was lecturing in a place where they had a bell, and the bell went off at exactly the right time for this fellow who just rang it there next to the wheel. Sunsets and sunrises look the same at sea, and not very exciting without color film. But this was before the days of color film entirely, over 50 years ago. The fellows are using leather boots now. I had rubber boots, but they're much more clammy than leather boots, and I hadn't even heard about it when I went on the ship. 8 bells in the forecastle, and this is in a work day, one of the weekdays, so the mates come down from the midship's to give each man a job. One or two men go to the wheel, generally one man, and men on lookout, 5 or 6 go to the sailmaker, 8 or 10 go to the blacksmith. Now, there's a lot of blacksmith work, a lot of metal on here. It gets worn, gets broken by the seas or storms, and so there's a lot of work. 100 feet long, this brand new four-cylinder building here. We've built the pieces down below and put it together on deck where there's 100 feet of clear space. But otherwise, there's nothing like that below with the cargo in there. We had general cargo, manufactured goods going to Chile. But they're sorting spuds there, and now they're bringing hundreds of pounds of seaweed from the open sea on board the ship, looking for parasites. They found over 50 kinds of parasites, put them in formaldehyde, and the captain is hoping that someday he'll find a new kind of fish or parasite that will be named for him. If you ever hear of a Jus-fish, Captain Jus, J-U-R-S, you know that he's found something on one of these voyages. Now, we're signaling a steamship returning from near Cape Horn, the Strait of Magellan. They had a shipwreck, and they're bringing back the survivors. The Strait of Magellan is some 250 miles north of Cape Horn, and is a strait not nearly big enough for these big sailing ships. Here's a 13-foot jellyfish, the biggest I've ever seen. I suppose you might be killed if you dived into it. I don't know. I didn't know how to try. But the doldrums are something that are quite easy to describe. There they are, like a painted ship upon a painted ocean. Of course, that's the famous quotation, and that's where we're sitting right now. We're sitting there. Oh, it rained last night, so they caught fresh water on the deck for washing clothes. You're not allowed to use it out of the tanks. There's not enough to get washing clothes that way, so you catch it yourself. But we're sitting here day after day. Luckily, instead of being there 2.5 weeks, we did it in 2.5 days, because we'd lost 17 days in the North Sea, and we're lucky to get through here in a hurry. It's a very quiet sort of a place. We're barely moving, but we are moving some instead of sitting solid now, and there's that super seaman, the captain, on the bowsprit, about to spear a fish. And you know how the light rays bend when you look down in water, and you have to throw the spear where the fish, it doesn't look like it's there at all, but he's been doing it for years. I just couldn't seem to catch a fish this way, and he did it nearly every time. But he has been at it for ages. We'll have that to eat about 20 minutes from now, fairly fresh, I'm sure, and it'll taste good. And now they've just thrown the chip log over the stern. There's a gadget on the end of the line which doesn't slip through the water, and it unwinds the line from the reel. And when the first knot of the line runs out, the mate will holler, turn. The boy with the hourglass turns, and in 14 seconds, when that sand runs through, he'll holler, stop. The mate stops the line, and having counted the number of knots that ran over the stern during that 14 seconds, that'll be the speed of the ship in knots or nautical miles per hour. That's obviously where it came from. I'm at the wheel now. There's another boy standing by. The worst thing you can do when you're at the wheel is get her aback, get the sails, the wind on the wrong side of the sails. It takes the whole gang about half, three-quarters of an hour to get her straightened out. It's really a mess, and everything is all going the wrong way. But now, again, we're tearing along. This is what we dream about, repairing cargo gear up there. In the center of the picture now is a light tower in which is an elevator. So when the stormy seas come over the forecastle head, you've got to put the side lights on this elevator down below, put it up inside the light tower, and the light shines out through some very heavy glass in the sides and forward. Those are the side lights, red to port, green to starboard, found on every ship. Now I'm going down the stay from the top of the foretopmast to the end of the bowsprit, some 17 stories down. And of course, you're not supposed to use your legs for gripping the stay. If you do, you'll wear out a brand new pair of dungarees in one trip down. Simply hand over hand up, hand over hand down, and no sliding. That's only done in Hollywood when they get something special on their hands. No sliding. That is absolutely not only frowned upon, you just can't do it with any skin left. Now, I read about a fellow, again, I didn't know whether it was a truthful book or just a novel of some sort, and a fellow came down the edge of sail, so I gave it a try, and another fellow got pictures of me, and I found I could do it, even though I had to hold the fingers straight and thumb straight and pinch the canvas between the ends of my fingers and thumb, a most insecure feeling, but it did work. And when we showed these pictures to the captain back in Hamburg, he said, that was not done. I don't know how I figured to get the pictures, but it wouldn't have been done if he'd seen it, that's for sure. But I tried these things I found in books, and many things worked. We're getting down towards the Horn now. Things are getting a little rough. If he drops that food, he won't get any more, so he has to watch it very carefully. We also are putting up nettings above the bulwarks to strain the sailors out, like fish nets and so forth. The bulwarks are maybe 5.5 to 6 feet high, but the seas go right over them. You see the netting there at the right now? That saved many a seaman being washing around the deck with his waves go through the net, strains the sailors out. Here they're filling the fresh water tank in preparation for Cape Horn, because some of those days you can't get buckets of water. You'd think they'd put a pipe from the pump right into the tank, but no, that would be too simple, I guess. But here, off the Horn now, we're here in a fog and practically no wind. Now, this happens much more often than you think, no wind. But fog, just occasionally, they always send the dumbest fellow on the watch up here to crank the foghorn. It's not loud enough to be heard at the stern of the ship, so I go wee, 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 sort of a thing, but you got to keep it going according to law. I'm disgusted with the weather. I came all these thousands of miles to get a big storm off Cape Horn, and here they're repairing cargo gear on the deck with no wind at all. It is just sitting here, and the sails hardly fill. We're being drifted back by the current, going the wrong way. We're trying to go the wrong way around the Horn. Of course, east to west is noted the wrong way. And I'm disgusted. But I took a precaution of going to Ireland. Look at this, not a ripple on the water, not a ripple. I went to Ireland before going on the trip to the Giant's Causeway, where they got a wishing seat and a wishing spring. I drank from the spring, I sat on the seat. I wish for some A-1 first-class storms off Cape Horn, and look what I get. For a week or 10 days, nothing more than a couple of mile-an-hour breeze, flat calm here, and even though I'd made all these wishes in the northern part of Ireland. But finally it came. It had to eventually, and came up with a big blast, sent us scurrying to the sails. There's 40 men furling one sail, the foresail here, and they're not up there playing tiddlywinks. There's 20 men out on the starboard side with body and soul lashings on, and 20 more men out on the port side, body and soul lashings on, because the buttons are not strong enough to hold your oilskins against the storm. Winds getting up over 100 miles an hour later on. But you put lashings around your waist, around your ankles, around your wrists, and around your neck to hold the oilskins on, not to keep dry, but to keep a little bit warmer, in the blast of freezing cold air, snow every month of the year. We got snowball fights around the deck. The two fellows just coming into the picture at the right here now were washed overboard on the way home. That means 2 empty bunks, and nothing is said about it. It was all very quiet, but that's possible. Now, you must be on the ball at all times and get yourself out of the way of a big wave coming roaring across, because there's not time for somebody to tell you how to go about it. You wind yourself up on some wire or a lifeline that's specially put up there for the purpose from the windward side, because otherwise you get bashed away from whatever you're trying to hang on to. Pictures from the top of the mast now 17 stories high, and when I showed these pictures in London, I lectured to the Honorable Company of Master Mariners, where every single man in the audience was a square-rigger skipper or retired, and they said afterwards, not a man in the audience, and we represent 3,000 to 4,000 times around Cape Horn, has ever seen that much water across the deck of a vessel that has not sunk. Can we get a copy for the British Museum? So I got a copy in the British Museum. I thought, what can a young fellow do to get something in the British Museum? It's incredible, but there's no other pictures taken under these circumstances ever taken and never will. There's no more loaded square riggers. This is storm number 2. In between the storms, you set sail. And you're going to see the ocean down here in the third storm looking like the bottom of Niagara Falls. The whole water is just blowing horizontally now. Just you can't sit down. It's blowing so fast. You're up over 90 now, and the next storm will bring it over 100 miles an hour, just screaming, 350 lines, screaming like you're torturing animals to death. The noise is fantastic. Setting that foreship, you saw 40 men furling. A bundle has been caught there. But in between the storms, the wind goes down off into an absolute flat calm. That makes it a very difficult place to sail around, but it's not all storms. Nobody writes about smooth water. What is there to say about it? No wind, period. Now watch this. The bottom of Niagara Falls looks exactly like you're going to see it here in about 3 or 4 seconds, because a tremendous open part of the sea is shown just tortured. Look, tortured, just like the water coming over Niagara Falls. Look at this, the open ocean. The forces involved are fantastic. There's no words that I can use in any language that'll tell you what it's like. If you've been there, that's the only way you'll know, because the forces are beyond anything you've ever experienced or thought was possible. Our lower topsails are built to stand any storm, and yet we had trouble there too. But the screaming is beyond belief. You'd all get up and get out if you had that noise of that caliber around here. And, oh, she is really pumping and straining. The noise of the vessel when you're down inside, groaning one piece against the other. You'd think it was coming apart. But it's built for Cape Horn and was not about to come apart. And, oh, how the chafing and wear and tear, not only on the ship but on the individuals. The lookout on the deck is back here amidships now. And I'm holding the camera steady with the ship. This is not the way to take it, but I tried it out to see what it looked like. It looks like the ocean is running around. The ship is staying still. Every bar taut line is just quivering and screaming. And the lookout is back here. Now, I'm on top of the chart house. And now the camera's held steady with the horizon, which is the proper way to take pictures. But to get pictures from down here, when a rogue sea may wipe you off, is just asking for trouble. And boy, trouble came in a big way. All of a sudden, I was afloat with a smashing crash. Couldn't even shut off the camera as I was knocked galley west here. And, oh, look at her roll. But that rogue wave just had my name on it, and I came within 1/4 inch of getting smashed. There she goes, smashed up completely and over the side there as I washed off the top of the chart house. But that's the kind of thing. I'm dying to get pictures to show my mother, father, brothers, and sisters what it's like off the Horn, and this is the nearest to it we've ever seen. Look at that one. Well, that's what I see happens when it comes a little bit aft, and then you get 2 seconds of pictures and you're finished. You're underwater again. The camera had been underwater 100 times. It was not made for that. Oh, here's one of the greatest sights, a main lower topsail carrying away. Now, in the edge of the canvas is a wire the size of your thumb. And the steady pressure of the wind just broke that wire. How, I don't know. But that sail is not supposed to be taken in ever, so they've got a preventer sheet out there on the end of the yard that's got to be unshackled before you can pull up what's left of the sail, and then they must all go up there and furl the pieces. You save everything, even little 5 or 6 inch strips pieces of marlin. You don't waste anything on these ships. And if the fellow who goes out there to take the shackle off, the preventer sheet, gets touched once by that canvas, he's dead. Well, he just knocks him off, and that's that. The skipper on deck was blowing his whistle, trying to make him stop, but we couldn't even hear him 5 feet away. But when they got that corner of the sail pulled up, the clew of the sail pulled up, you'll see a 4-inch strip of canvas down the lower right-hand corner just hanging down there. You just barely see it now. But the third mate got up on the end of the yard, could not reach that 4-inch strip of canvas, so he hung down. And I missed the best picture of the whole trip. I ran out of film. He hung down by one arm and one leg from the foot rope, and just then a squall came and the ship rolled to windward, and that man's entire body vibrated just like those sails. Just the whole body just flapped, just like the sail. Never have we ever heard of or seen such a thing as a man's body flapping like a sail. But when the man came down, nobody said one word to him. We all would have done it. Some kind of hypnotism makes us do those things. It's just incredible. When you look at them later, it's crazy, but they do it under the conditions of working for the ship, making you go, she needs you. And when there's something like that going on, you would do the same thing, too, when you're young under those conditions. Look at the water just blowing horizontally. Just the whole air is full of water. When you breathe water along with some air as well. But I tell you, it's just wild, the circumstances. The nets are getting tired now. They're gradually wearing and chafing down, but they saved many a life. And how the seas do crash across the deck, wear and tear at the equipment and the rigging and all that, and we have to watch the chafe. And finally, we have to drive the ship 200 miles west before it can turn north. Cape Horn is not just a point where you go around and finish. No, sir, you got to go 200 miles west against the currents, against the winds, and then head north. Otherwise, Chile has got the worst lee shore in the world and is known for smashing up ships by the hundreds there over many years. But these fellows are at the after wheels now. The midships wheels broke, and they're lashed here now, so they won't get thrown over the side by the wheel when it gives a kick. If it chooses to kick, it can catch in your clothes and throw you right over the side. But now we've turned north. We're headed up along the coast of Chile, and the mates came to me and said, "Look, did the captain ever tell you how he saved a couple of fellows during a storm?" No, tell me about it. Oh, he said he doesn't want anybody to know about it because he deserted his ship. But what happened was this. He saw somebody washed overboard forward, and he ran to the stern, grabbed the spanker sheet in one hand, jumped over the stern into the boiling cauldron under the stern during a storm, grabbed the man's hair as he came by, and we pulled him back on board. One hand on the line and one hand of the man's hair, and he did that twice. Now, the reason he doesn't want anybody to know about it, and in fact it's never been in print, is because a captain should not desert his ship. And here he goes jumping over the stern. But he's a Superman. 93 days out, we see Chile now, the first sight of land. And here's a little tug with a big stack, loud whistle, and no power, but useless to us. So I was able to get on the tug and to get these pictures. Looking at the bow of the Peking coming in now. Oh, all my still pictures were double exposures. Luckily, you can't do that with a movie camera. And there you have the ship sailing in proudly. Oh, the vessel that we fought for, that we went into danger, that we got bashed up on, and it caused such agony, cold, wet, sleep in your wet clothes, no other way to dry them. But that's the vessel we fought. So why do you do it? For cargo. Cargo is king. The only thing that's dry on that ship is the cargo. And if you don't bring in dry cargo, you might as well stay at home. So cargo is cared for absolutely. The seamen must take care of themselves. But what a voyage. What I learned there that saved my lifetimes and the future. Watching every detail and making sure it's right ahead of time. And that captain really is a magnificent example of a seagoing character. And they developed the most efficient carrying of cargo under square rig of anybody in the world. The Flying P line. All the ships named with a P for the first letter. And they are in what's called the nitrate trade from Chile to Hamburg, backwards and forwards, and the skipper done it 56 times. Now, for the last time, they're putting in a harbor furl here, and I was disgusted. There's no tug in the port that could pull us up the harbor. The captain had to beat the ship up just as if it was a private yacht. Beat the ship up the harbor, all 8,000 tons of her after 11,000 miles of struggle. But he was used to it. That's the only way he's come in all the years he sailed. Beat the ship up the harbor on his own power. Up aloft there, fellows. You only got 17 stories to go. Hurry up on the double. That's right. And what a voyage this was. Here's the upper Togansel yard coming down. Half the yards, come down and have to be pulled back up again. Great big steel yards, all by hand when you set sail again. 9 of them come down. Here's the foresail being pulled up. This is the one you saw 40 men beating the ice out of it there off the Horn when they finally got some wind. What a magnificent thing to come out with one of the best storms going. The captain agrees that was a #1 first-class storm, the like of which is seldom seen even off the Horn, that #3 that we saw there, and I was there with a camera to get pictures of it. How lucky can you be? And now as we come in, upper topsail yard coming down, it's 92 feet long and bearing about 5 tons, and somebody will be pulling it back up again eventually. But lending a hand now, the skipper. What a hand. And 22 turns. Normal yacht has 3 turns. This has 22 because it's enormous size and weight. Down goes the anchor, the last bit of film, except for one shot of furling sail. And in Talcahuano, Chile, 93 days out. There's one shot now of putting in a harbor furl. The mate sat down there, the first time I've ever seen him sit down at all. It was about 30 seconds, though, and he's busy again with the ship's detail. But why do they sign on for all this misery in some cases? Well, they kind of forget about that. They think of the thrills, but mainly they think of this sailing along as the sun goes down in the trade winds. Oh, it's absolutely lovely. That's Cape Horn as I saw it. Thank you.